Welcome. And Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And if all of you stay around, we'll have a minyan at the end. So that would be lovely. Let's get started here. So we are really into the heart of Kedoshim here, where we're talking about basic, decent, laws of kindness, you might say, right? And this verse here, which we had read, and we were into this major Rashi here about not going around as a talebearer amongst your people, and don't stand by the blood of your neighbor, your fellow, I them the Lord. So that's the statement in the Torah. And Rashi was talking about how, the derivation of these words, how Rachel has to do with an itinerant peddler, but also is talking about gossip and bad mouthing and things like that. And he's going on discussing the origins of this particular language. So I double checked the Targum. So he says that if you look at the Targum, look at this, Lo techol kortzin ba'amech. So what is kortzin exactly? So it has to do with the Aramaic, literally means do not eat, lo techol, do not eat, kortzin, bread, this crumbly bread, something like that. But it's bread of destruction is how Jastrow translates it. And it's got to do with informing against. This was a major problem. And by the way, this is how the Second Temple was destroyed, essentially, by people informing against one another. So, at least according to one story. So here we go. In Daniel chapter 3, Va'achlu kortzihon. Di Yehudae, that's the Aramaic, and it literally means they ate, right? Achlu, kortzihon, their bread, something like that. But it's a metaphor that means to inform against the Jews. Acha ochel kortzi by malka, achal kortza by malka. So again, it means essentially to inform the king, right? He informed against them with the king. And Rashi goes on to say, Nearabba, it appears to me, shahayu mishpatim, that it was their custom, the echol. So where's this to eat, right, coming from in this metaphor? He says it was their custom, the echol bebeit hamakabel divrehem, bebeit hamakabel divrehem, that the custom was to sit down and eat some sort of snack, okay? Shum halta'ah, some kind of light food in the home, bevayit, in the home of the one who was listening to what they had to say. So of course you can innocently go and have a nice chat with someone over tea, right? But in this case, they would be doing this to inform against someone, to gossip, right? Vahu gemar chizuk, and in a sense, the sitting down and eating together strengthened shedvarav mekuyamim uma'amidam al ha'emet. And the whole idea was that since they were sitting down and relaxing over a cup of tea, a little snack here, that it was like a way of establishing their words, that his words were established and set up regarding truth and true. So whether it was gossip, whether it was bad mouthing, whether it was actually slanderous, sitting down and having this light snack with someone or tea was a way of sort of making it look like it was a legitimate thing. Give me one moment. I just have some housekeeping to do here. Thank you. And let's go on. V'ota halta'a, and that particular snack, or sitting down for this, okay, nikret achilat kurtzin. That's what they meant by eating this kurtzin, having this snack. Lashon koretz be'inav, but it has another interpretation, which is koretz be'inav, which means to wink, to wink. And in Proverbs chapter 6, shechein derech kol holched rachil, because it is the manner of someone who goes around gossiping or bad-mouthing or talking in this way, likrotz be'enehem, to wink their eyes, ulermoz divrei rechilutam, and to suggest the words of their gossip or their bad-mouthing, shelo yavinu, so that other people, that we're getting to this, should understand, wouldn't understand, sha'ar hashomim, so other people listening to them wouldn't really understand what they were saying. And then the verse went on, Lo ta'amud al darm re'acha, do not stand by the blood of your neighbor, lir'ot b'mitato, to be able to stand by and watch his death. V'ata yachol latzilo, and you're in a position to save him. So, I mean, there's a condition that obviously if you're not in a position to save him, there's nothing much you can do about it. It's awful. But if you are in a position to save him, you need to do something. You need to take action. And again, Torat Kohanim, that's a sifra. Kagon tovea banar, for example, someone who's drowning in a river, v'chaya or listim, or a wild animal, or bandits by imalav are coming upon him. And if you are in a position to protect him and to save him. Ani Hashem, and the way the sentence ends, I am the Lord. So the point about that, as we said before, is like a seal on the statement, Ne'eman, I can be relied upon, the Shalem Schar, and to pay reward, to give reward, the Ne'eman Lihi Pareya, and I can be counted on to avenge. If you just stand by, there will be consequences, is what it's saying. Some other beautiful, beautiful statements here. Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. By the way, this is a verse that until I prepared for this class, I did not fully understand. But here we go. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You should not carry hatred against another person in your heart. Hocheach tochiach et amitecha. So when you admonish, or you should surely admonish, in other words, if you've got a gripe, let them know. Don't keep it inside your heart, all right? Et amitecha, your fellow. The hochiach means to admonish. Velo tisa alav chet. But the way this vav is understood here means, but do not bear sin on his account, Very important Rashi we're going to do now. So the idea is, it's called halbanat panim, which means whitening the face, literally. And what it's talking about is lo talbin, you should not, it means to publicly humiliate someone. So when you're correcting this person, don't do it in public in a way that this person is humiliated. So I know there is a custom, but it's an accepted custom, maybe no longer, but at least it was an accepted custom to correct a Torah reader, even though they were doing it publicly, but it was not understood as a humiliation. But otherwise, correcting someone publicly makes them feel humiliated. And so look at this, the sensitivity and the thoughtfulness that goes on here in terms of trying to create a society that is more than simply just, but that is a society that displays kindness. Lo tikum, you shall not take revenge. Velo titor, and it means, and you shall not carry a grudge. Ipnei amecha, the people of your nation. V'ahavta l'reacha, here's that famous statement. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Ani Adonai, I am the Lord. So there it is. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18 is that famous verse. So what's the difference between revenge and bearing a grudge? What's the difference? So Rashi has some interesting things to say. He gives an actual example. Lo tikom, do not take revenge. And by the way, I mean, we know of people who are vengeful. They will retaliate, right? So, Amar lo, person says to him, this is from Yoma, Tractate Yoma, deals with Yom Kippur, right, in the Talmud. Amar lo, he said to him, one person says to another, Hashileni magelcha, lend me your sickle. Amar lo lav. And the man said to him, no, I won't lend you my sickle. Lemachar, the next day, Amar lo, so this person B, who said he wouldn't lend his sickle, said to A, Hashileni kardomcha, please lend me your hatchet. Amar lo, so A says to him, Eni mashilcha, I'm not going to lend my hatchet to you, kederech shalo hishaltani. Okay, just as you didn't lend your sickle to me, I'm not lending my hatchet to you. That is revenge. That's taking revenge. Zo hi nekima. This is the explanation of nekima, revenge. The ezohu netira. But on the other hand, what is netira, right? Amarle, carrying a grudge, in other words, bearing a grudge. And natir means it's from like this, it's an Aramaism of the word shamor, right? To guard, to hold on to. Amarle, so A says to B, Hashileni karboncha. He says, lend me your hatchet. Amarlo lav. So he said to him, no. B said to A, no. Lemachar amarlo hashileni magelcha. The next day, B comes to A and says, lend me your sickle. Amarlo. So A says to B, ha helecha. He says, here it is. Ve'eni kamotcha. But I'm not like you, shelo hishaltani, because you didn't lend to me. I'm better than you, because I'm lending it to you, but you didn't lend it to me. Zohi natira. That is bearing a grudge. Interesting, right? So it isn't just motivations, feelings. Torah deals with it. Why? Shenoter ha'eva belivo, because he keeps the hatred in his heart. You've got to try to get rid of hatred. Afal pi she'eno nokem, despite the fact that he doesn't take revenge. Va'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And he says in the Sifra, Amar Rabbi Akiva, said Rabbi Akiva, Zo klal gadol b'Torah. This is the greatest statement in the Torah.
So I guess my question on all this is, I understand the point, but kind of there's still the person that didn't, okay, taking the first example, right? The person that didn't lend the sickle, to the other person who asked for it, was also, they've done something wrong too, right? They haven't helped out their neighbor, right? So I mean, I guess the question is, if you're only using the example to show, to demonstrate the context, that's fine. But there's also the other part about it, where what about that person who didn't lend it in the first place? And then we're saying, yeah. So I mean, there's kind of that part of the story, but maybe that gets covered somewhere else. Maybe they, they're what they've done wrong comes out in something else, or maybe we've already covered it. I'm not sure.
I take it as an assumption that if you're getting revenge, it's for something that was done that was wrong.
Correct.
If it was a good thing, you wouldn't need to get revenge on it.
Right. But I'm saying that the person that, I ask you to lend me something and you say, no, I'm not going to lend you something. So, and then the next day, you ask me to lend you something and I don't want to lend it to you because you didn't lend it to me. Okay, I can see that. Well, in the first place, maybe, you didn't lend me the first thing. So now I become very disadvantaged, right? I couldn't get what I was supposed to get done, which is even worse. And on the reverse, you want
revenge.
Well, maybe, but I mean, it's not only want revenge. The question is, the person who hasn't lent me must also, that also must not be, there must be something wrong with their not lending to me.
Right.
They haven't treated me well, right? That's my point is,
Right. And my
yeah,
point is, that's obvious because that's the thing that makes you
right.
need to have revenge.
What
Okay,
I'm saying is, where is their
yeah.
judgment?
Oh,
Where's the judgment for that person, not me, that person? If I go ahead and I comply and say, okay, I'll give you my hammer the next day, even though you didn't give me your sickle, which is fine. Where is that person who didn't give me their sickle in the first place?
It's
Where is their judgment?
it's implied by your need for revenge.
Okay.
It's
No, it's
implicit.
no,
Lawrence,
it's not.
okay, please, may
Yeah.
I speak? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a principle of interpretation, which is called a fortiori, right? Kal vachomer. And so the understanding is that if something as simple as not even bearing a grudge is wrong, what do you think about not doing it in the first place? In other words, one can infer from the way this verse is stated, that the first one is just as bad or worse. So it is simply a way, it's one of the ways in which the Torah, even though the Torah, and many laws, by the way, which are considered biblical, are not actually stated explicitly in the Torah, but are derived from these particular principles. If you have an Art Scroll Siddur, there's a part in the service where they discuss the principles of interpretation of Rabbi Yishmael. And they explain in the Art Scroll, there's a commentary underneath, which explains each one of these logical hermeneutic principles. And the very first one is a fortiori. In other words, if not bearing a grudge is wrong, okay? I mean, compared to not being helpful in the first place, which is the point you're bringing out, well, then for sure, not being helpful is against the Torah, okay? And that you will be held accountable. If you're held accountable for not even bearing a grudge, for sure you're going to be held accountable for not doing it in the first place, for not being helpful.
Okay, so that was the question I had.
That was the question, right?
Yeah. So basically, if I'm, being which is, you want to be the better person, so to speak, in this case, right? The other way we always state it, so I don't hold a grudge. Your point is that the other person who is not helpful will be held accountable for that, and yes, I'm not. Okay, and right. That's good. Okay, I mean that's appropriate. Good right. is not the right word, right. But okay, that helps.
Good.
That definitely helps.
Yeah, God, just as God holds us accountable for this, God would hold that person accountable even more, for sure. Okay, for sure. But here's the thing: when it says all its paths are paths of peace, right? I am telling you from my own experience, there is nothing better than trying as best as you can to set a good example, and trying to delete any arrogance you may have regarding this, and just taking the high road. That's what this is talking about, but not taking the high road to show how much better you are than other people. And this is such a wonderful example, right? When people complain about people who aren't as religious as they are and look down on them, all right? It's the same kind of thing. And again, the psychology of that is generally to make you feel better about yourself, but taking it at the expense of someone else. We're not God. God understands. God is the only, when we say God is the true judge, it isn't just a casual statement. It takes into account the fact that God understands things, that we believe that God understands hidden motives, circumstances, etc., etc. I mean, circumstances make such a difference in regards to everything. So in the development of Jewish law, you have the stated Torah that's right here, okay? And this concept of written Torah. Beyond that, you have this concept that I introduced today of logical derivation. Those logical derivations, those laws that are logically derived, have the same validity as the written Torah. Okay, the oral Torah is not the rabbi's edicts, because that's a third stage, and that is the kinds of protections that the rabbis decreed to make sure that we guard the written Torah. But the written Torah, when we talk about that, includes the oral Torah. Okay, Golda?
Yeah. I've got I think when sometimes we say that things are out of order, I think if he had if he had started with love your fellow as yourself or love your neighbor as yourself, everything else would have made better sense. You wouldn't have to even think about the other things
Interesting.
that, because if you wanted to borrow something, you would lend. I mean, it's just, that would make sense.
Okay, remember that borrowing in the stuff was Rashi explaining specifically what it was. The way the Torah states it was the way, if I were to just say it in my own words, it would say, don't take revenge, don't even bear a grudge, but love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay, I can see that.
So in some ways, you know, that's
Right.
That's the conclusion. In other words, it's in a way it's saying this is these are the things that are involved. Again, remember, how many times have I said it right? The knowledge is deconstruction, right? Okay,
Right.
the general principle is love your neighbor as yourself, but without starting to deconstruct that, you really don't understand that. So the Torah has now told you one of those ways is not to take revenge, and I mean that very much, and not to bear a grudge. That is involved. If you're bearing a grudge and if you're taking revenge, then you're not loving your neighbor as yourself. And then what Rashi does is deconstruct it even more to give us more specific examples. And
the hardest part, though,
yes, go ahead,
is excising that from you.
Of course.
The idea of a I mean, yeah, I can not hold a grudge publicly, but
right.
it's still gonna be eating away at me later.
Of course.
That just that person never treated me right.
I know.
Well,
right. So
I mean,
that's never addressed. How do you fix your innards?
But you can address that, and it's hard, but it's not impossible, and it takes will, and it takes, you know, looking at context and reframing things and trying to understand the other person and thinking about your own things, you know, in ways which you can relate to the cause that, you know, kind of led to their acting like that. And I have, you know, a lot of examples in my own life, and some of them I've already successfully gone through that process, and others I'm still working on it because they're fresher, and you know, it takes some time, but it takes will, and it takes addressing it either, you know, in therapy or with a friend, or even just
the therapy is really good,
or even with yourself, but it takes coming back to it and working on it and thinking about it and trying to reframe and reconstruct and find ways to neutralize the feelings that you're having.
Nice. Thank you.
But the point is this: if you didn't feel it was wrong, you wouldn't even start. In other words, you have to start at a position that says, wait a second, having these kinds of feelings, talking in this kind of way, behaving in this kind of way isn't right. If you don't think it's right, if you think it's okay to be that way, you're never going to do anything about it. So the very first position is, it's like saying, to admit you're an alcoholic or to admit that you're an addict. If you're not willing to do that, then you're not going to make any changes. But the actual process of making, I mean, books have been written about this, you know, in terms of trying to help us. But I totally agree, Lauren. I think you're right. I mean, from that, you can train yourself to be solution oriented, or you can allow yourself to do nothing but complain.
But
and to be solution oriented is not to take revenge, but to try and think positively. How could we solve this problem?
I mean, besides the Torah tells you what's wrong, but you also, you yourself hurt from these kinds of feelings that affect you.
You're right. Absolutely.
When you hold on to them.
I agree. That's the Torah being a tree of life, right? That when you hold on to these angers and these bitternesses, it actually has physical repercussions on you. You actually start to physically feel. Yeah. Go ahead. I know I don't see names, but I know a couple of you want to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was going to actually say, you know, and I agree with Lauren. I actually think holding a grudge is worse, in the sense that, you know, it actually takes an act to do revenge, right? So people don't, do revenge to some extent, unless, they're really, their feelings are extreme, or, a lot of times they won't do revenge just because doing revenge would involve something maybe illegal or something, that's just going to put you in a very bad position. So,
Yeah. David, you just
David.
muted yourself. Do you want to unmute yourself?
yeah. So anyway, so what I was saying was, holding a grudge, so revenge is something extreme and requires action. And a lot of times you won't maybe not take that action because it's immoral, illegal, etc. But even if you don't do revenge, holding a grudge is much simpler and, much more inside of you, right? I mean, in the sense that you can't, it doesn't require action to hold a grudge, right? It can just stay inside of you forever. So I actually think holding the grudge part is harder to get rid of, as Lauren pointed out. And I think it's also actually far more, prevalent, or however you want to look at it. So it's actually kind of the worst of the two, I guess, is my point. Most people will want to take revenge. They won't probably do it. Will they hold a grudge? Yeah, they might hold it for their entire life. So yeah.
David, let me say this, and you've just connected the previous sentence to this one. How do most people take revenge? And they take revenge. They go around behind that person's back and badmouth them.
Yep.
They do it. And they do it.
That's true. But that's one of the few ways that yeah. But you're right. That is one way to do it. But and even that, people hesitate sometimes bad-mouthing people. Okay. Depending on who you are, you're right.
Yes, it does. And it depends on the habits that you developed. Because I know of people who have that reputation.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm not going to disagree with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But all right. So, I would probably then challenge the idea of what's worse. Okay. I think they're equally bad, but in different ways.
Yeah,
because like you say, the one might be more individually long term. But the truth is, when you start to go around bad mouthing someone, they then talk to someone else. They then talk to someone else.
No, I didn't mean revenge was. I didn't mean one was worse than the other. I just meant that grudges are something that just are easier for people to maintain and hold on to.
Yes,
versus acts of revenge,
yes.
which is kind of like you said, you have to take an action, and then you really have to be that kind of person that would go around bad mouthing, which most people, I mean, many people are not. Okay, but many people are. Okay.
Well, you can't do that. It's kind of like the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. Because if you covet something, it's going to lead to any of the other things that are bad.
Yeah.
So yes, so this whole idea of not loving your neighbor and then having revenge and just whatever, all this stuff eats up inside of you, and you're going to do something that's going to just spin right out of control. So it's back to controlling yourself.
What part of what this sounds like to me, in some sense, and I don't know if you can translate grudge or similarly as resentment, because resentment is feeling it again and again and again, and you rehearse it and you go over it and you hold on to it, and it's like sticking your tongue in a canker sore and saying, "Is this healed yet? Is this healed yet?" No, I still remember that.
You live it. You live with it forever.
When I was little, I used to get canker sores, and I used to do that. I couldn't understand why.
But even if you get physical revenge, it doesn't mean you let go of the grudge.
Correct.
Yeah,
but
lots of ways to take revenge.
And even after you've done that, you probably haven't getting rid of the grudge anyway.
Oh yeah.
No, because it's like,
well, Golda, it feeds on itself.
Sure.
This stuff feeds on itself.
Sure. Absolutely.
So part of you were talking about AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-step program. The 4th step is the searching and fearless moral inventory. I've always thought of, or I have long thought of the month of Elul as Jewish 4th step.
Nice.
And you start with, what are your resentments? What are you holding a grudge against? And you know, in some senses, we're talking about looking at where they're coming from and reframing it and stuff. A lot of it is letting it be their problem, letting it go, acceptance,
Yeah.
letting it be in the past instead of bringing it with you on your back into the present as a
Right.
resentment that drives you. That, as you say, there are many books written on this. Yeah. And, but I'm very appreciative to hear of it talked with in this detail. And I just want to say that this portion is in the Reform movement is the Yom Kippur afternoon
Right.
Torah reading.
Right.
Oh,
For a long, long
interesting.
time. That's been
Instead of
that even in the Union prayer book, going all the way
Instead
back.
of-
Wow.
By the way, Judith, let me add, can I just add
And
to
then
the
we
point?
almost
of
never
course.
read it except for, just that little bit, during Acharei Mot, and everybody forgets to read the ending.
So Judith, let me say that you mentioned the fourth step. So I always think of the path of tshuva, right? The path of repentance as outlined through our tradition, as in a sense being a 12-step program.
Mm,
Tshuva itself, right?
mm.
That process, because it does involve various steps. So anyway, we need to stop. As much as we can pick this up tomorrow possibly, but I hope you can see what wonderful stuff there is. I mean, Leviticus is an interesting book, very challenging, and at the same time has some of the greatest stuff in it, but you got to be open. So let me close with this, and I'm going to stop the recording.